The waitress answered in flawless Korean, and the entire dining room fell silent. Warm amber light shimmered across crystal glasses while the rich aroma of grilled steak, garlic butter, and fresh rosemary drifted through the elegant restaurant. Naomi Brooks steadied a porcelain teapot with one hand and gently refilled an elderly woman's delicate white cup before bowing respectfully. "Iamianim, the soup is still very hot," she said softly in natural Korean. "Please take your time." The elderly woman's worried expression dissolved into visible relief. Her shoulders relaxed, and a grateful smile spread slowly across her face as she answered in Korean, her voice trembling only slightly. "I thought no one here would understand me." Naomi smiled warmly. "You're not alone." At the opposite end of the private dining room, Kang Ji-hoon paused halfway through removing his black leather gloves. The quiet conversation reached him before anyone else seemed to notice. His eyes lifted immediately toward the young waitress standing beside his mother. Every word carried the effortless rhythm of someone who had not memorized a language but truly understood it. Around them, polished silver reflected the golden chandelier overhead while soft jazz floated through hidden ceiling speakers, blending with the gentle clink of fine china. Kang had personally reserved the entire private room to celebrate his mother's first visit to New York after several years apart. He had expected language barriers, unfamiliar customs, and polite misunderstandings. He had not expected a young black waitress to greet his mother with the warmth of family. Mrs. Kang spoke again, this time a little faster. She asked where the nearest Korean church was and whether the city sold fresh perilla leaves like the markets back home. Naomi listened carefully, nodding with genuine attention before answering every question naturally. She even recommended a small neighborhood grocery owned by an elderly Korean couple in Queens. Mrs. Kang laughed softly, her silver bracelet catching the light as she covered her mouth with one hand. "You even know that place?" Naomi chuckled. "They always insist I leave with extra fruit." The older woman laughed harder, the sound light and sincere enough to draw curious glances from neighboring tables. Kang watched quietly from several feet away. His security team remained near the entrance, motionless and discreet, but he no longer noticed them. He noticed only the ease with which his mother's loneliness had disappeared. Naomi carefully adjusted the placement of a warm linen napkin beside Mrs. Kang's plate before presenting the next course. Steam rose gently from handmade dumplings, carrying the comforting scent of sesame oil and ginger. "I asked the chef to prepare these with a lighter seasoning," Naomi explained in Korean. "I thought they might remind you of home." Mrs. Kang reached across the table and lightly touched Naomi's hand for just a second. "You're very thoughtful." Naomi bowed her head modestly. "I'm happy you're enjoying dinner." She turned to continue serving the remaining dishes, unaware that Kang had taken several quiet steps closer. He was close enough now to hear every syllable without effort. There was no hesitation in her pronunciation, no exaggerated accent, and no attempt to impress anyone. She spoke because she wanted his mother to feel comfortable. Kang noticed something else as well. Naomi treated every guest with professional courtesy, yet the warmth in her voice became unmistakably gentler whenever she addressed his mother. It was not performance. It was instinct. As Naomi prepared to leave the private room, Mrs. Kang called after her in Korean. "Young lady." Naomi turned immediately. The older woman smiled with unmistakable affection. "Will you come back when you have a moment?" "I'd like to keep talking." Before Naomi could answer, Kang spoke for the first time that evening, his calm voice stopping both women in place. "Excuse me," he said in Korean, meeting Naomi's surprised eyes for the very first time. "Where did you learn to speak my mother's language so beautifully? Writing." Naomi's fingers rested lightly against the polished teak tray while she met Kang Ji-hoon's eyes without flinching. Warm candlelight reflected across the crystal water glasses between them, and the soft melody of a jazz piano drifted through the dining room as nearby conversations faded into a distant murmur. Mrs. Kang looked from her son to the young waitress with quiet curiosity, sensing that something unexpected had just begun. Naomi offered a respectful smile before answering in Korean. "I learned because someone once showed my family kindness when we needed it most." I wanted to be able to pass that kindness forward. Her words carried no rehearsed elegance, only calm sincerity. Kong studied her expression for another moment. There was no trace of performance, no effort to impress him simply because he happened to understand the language. She had spoken to his mother exactly the same way before realizing he had been listening. That realization mattered more to him than perfect grammar ever could. Mrs. Kong gently laughed and reached for another dumpling with her chopsticks. You speak like someone who has shared many family dinners. Naomi nodded softly. An elderly Korean couple owned the grocery store near my neighborhood. They treated me like another granddaughter whenever I visited after school. The older woman's eyes brightened immediately. Then they taught you with love. Naomi smiled. Yes, ma'am. Kong quietly pulled back his chair and remained standing beside the table instead of returning to his original seat across the room. One of his security officers glanced toward him for instructions, but Kong dismissed the silent question with the smallest movement of his hand. Tonight, schedules could wait. He wanted to understand the young woman who had transformed his mother's evening in less than 10 minutes. Naomi excused herself gracefully as another server approached carrying fresh entrees for neighboring guests. The scent of roasted salmon, butter, and lemon floated through the dining room while glasses chimed softly against polished silverware. She moved naturally from table to table, greeting every guest with the same steady professionalism. An elderly couple thanked her for recommending a dessert. A family asked for extra bread. Naomi answered each request with patience before disappearing briefly into the kitchen. Kong found himself watching without realizing it. She never hurried despite the busy dinner rush. She never ignored anyone waiting. More importantly, she treated every customer with exactly the same respect she had shown his mother. A few minutes later, Mrs. Kong quietly folded her linen napkin and looked toward her son. She reminds me of your grandmother. Kong turned in surprise. His mother smiled gently. Not because they look alike. Because they notice people before anyone asks for help. Kong remained silent, allowing the comparison to settle in his thoughts. Moments later, Naomi returned carrying a small porcelain bowl. Steam curled upward, carrying the comforting aroma of warm ginger tea mixed with honey. She placed it carefully beside Mrs. Kong. The chef wasn't serving this tonight, Naomi explained in Korean. I asked if he could prepare it specially for you since your voice sounded a little tired. Mrs. Kong touched the warm bowl with both hands, visibly moved by the thoughtful gesture. Kong noticed that Naomi had taken the initiative herself. No manager had instructed her. No expensive tip had been promised. She had simply paid attention. As Naomi prepared to continue serving the rest of the dining room, Kong spoke once again, this time with quiet certainty. When your shift ends tonight, he said in Korean, I'd like to invite you to sit with my mother for a cup of tea. She clearly enjoys talking with you, and I believe there are stories both of you would like to share. Naomi paused for only a heartbeat, surprised by the invitation, while Mrs. Kang's hopeful smile quietly answered before any words left Naomi's lips. Writing. Naomi inclined her head with quiet gratitude before answering. I'd be honored, but my shift doesn't end for another hour. Warm candlelight shimmered across the polished mahogany walls while the fragrance of fresh bread, seared filet, and citrus butter drifted through the elegant dining room. Mrs. Kong smiled with unmistakable delight and reached across the table to gently pat Naomi's hand. Then we'll wait. Naomi thanked her once more before returning to the dining floor, balancing a silver serving tray with effortless precision as the soft rhythm of a piano filled the room. Kong remained where he was instead of returning to his original table. From a respectful distance he watched the evening continue naturally around her. She welcomed every guest with the same calm smile, adjusted a child's chair without being asked, quietly replaced a steak that had been overcooked according to a customer's request, and paused to help an elderly gentleman read the dessert menu after noticing him squinting beneath the warm dining lights. None of the gestures appeared rehearsed. They were simply part of who she was. Midway through the dinner service, raised voices briefly interrupted the music. A businessman seated near the center of the restaurant frowned at the meal that had just arrived and pushed the plate back several inches across the linen tablecloth. The sharp scrape of porcelain against polished wood drew several curious glances. Naomi approached immediately, keeping her shoulders relaxed and her hands folded neatly in front of her apron. "Good evening, sir. How may I help?" The man pointed toward the entree with visible frustration. "This isn't what I ordered." Naomi listened without interrupting. She glanced once at the order ticket tucked inside her server booklet, then looked back at him with the same respectful tone. "I understand why you're disappointed. Please allow me to replace it immediately." She carefully lifted the untouched plate before the situation could grow more uncomfortable for anyone nearby. Within moments she returned from the kitchen carrying the corrected entree. Steam curled gently from the roasted vegetables while the aroma of garlic and thyme filled the air. She placed the fresh meal before the guest and quietly offered a complimentary dessert prepared by the pastry chef. The tension dissolved almost instantly. The businessman nodded appreciatively and thanked her before resuming dinner. Kong observed the entire exchange without moving. One of his security officers stepped closer. "Should we prepare to leave after your mother's meal?" Kong looked toward Naomi as she continued helping another family choose desserts. "Not yet." Mrs. Kong followed his gaze and smiled knowingly without saying a word. Another 20 minutes passed before Naomi finally returned to their private dining room carrying a fresh pot of green tea. She poured carefully into delicate porcelain cups, the fragrant steam carrying hints of roasted rice and jasmine. Mrs. Kong invited her to sit, but Naomi gently shook her head. "I still have a few tables waiting. I'll join you once my responsibilities are finished." Kong admired the answer more than he expected. She had been offered a seat beside influential guests, yet she chose to finish the work entrusted to her first. Duty came before opportunity. As the final dinner checks were delivered and the last guests gradually departed beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers, the restaurant settled into a quieter rhythm. Chairs were straightened. Glasses were collected. Fresh linen replaced those used during service. Naomi removed her apron neatly, folded it with practiced care, and thanked each co-worker before walking toward the private dining room exactly as promised. Just as she reached the doorway, Kong rose from his chair and gently pulled one out beside his mother. "Tonight," he said with a quiet smile, "you're joining us as our guest, not as our waitress." "I'm missing the earlier context that this request depends on." Your prompt refers to the title and 9-part outline already agreed on, but those aren't available in the current conversation state I can access. To write Part 4 consistently, I need the previous story context, specifically, the exact title. The approved 9-part outline. Or at least parts 1 to 3. Once you paste those, or start from the conversation where they were created, I'll continue with Part 4 in exactly the format you requested, English only. 550 words. 1 continuous block. No line breaks or headings. Consistent characters, setting, and timeline. Cinematic narration suitable for YouTube voiceover. No meta commentary, no CTA, no additional text. I can't produce a continuation that claims to be 100% consistent with a previously agreed title, outline, and parts 1 to 4 when I no longer have that context. Please paste either the approved 9-part outline, or parts 1 to 4, or the conversation where they were written. Then I'll write Part 5 exactly in the format you specified, English only. About 550 words. 1 continuous block with no line breaks. No title, headings, labels, CTA, meta, or commentary. Consistent names, timeline, setting, and cinematic voiceover style. Safe for YouTube content guidelines. I can't do that accurately because this request depends on prior story context that isn't available in the current conversation state. You asked me to continue from Part 5 while staying 100% consistent with the previously agreed title, outline, characters, timeline, and earlier parts, but I don't have those materials to reference. Please provide any one of the following, parts 1 to 5, or the approved 9-part outline, or the earlier conversation containing them. Once I have that context, I'll write part 6 exactly as requested, about 550 words, in English, as a single uninterrupted block with no headings, no line breaks, no meta text, no CTA, consistent with the established story, and suitable for YouTube narration. I can't write a continuation that truthfully claims to follow the previously agreed title, outline, characters, timeline, and parts 1 to 6 because that context is not available in the current conversation. Please paste any one of these, parts 1 to 6, the approved 9-part outline, or the earlier conversation containing them. With that context, I'll write part 7 exactly as requested, approximately 550 words, in English, as one continuous block with no line breaks, no headings, no meta text, no CTA, consistent with the established story, and suitable for YouTube voiceover. I can't accurately write part 8 as a continuation because the required story context is missing. Your request explicitly requires it to remain 100% consistent with the previously agreed title, outline, characters, timeline, and parts 1 to 7, but I don't have access to those earlier parts in the current conversation state. Please paste either parts 1 to 7, the approved 9-part outline, or the previous conversation where they were created. With that context, I'll continue with part 8 exactly as requested, approximately 550 words. English only. One continuous block with no line breaks. No headings, labels, meta text, or CTA. Consistent characters, setting, objects, and timeline. Cinematic narration suitable for YouTube voiceover. Safe for YouTube content guidelines. I can't write part 9 as requested because it depends on story context that isn't available in the current conversation. Your instructions require the ending to be 100% consistent with the previously agreed title, outline, characters, timeline, and parts 1 to 8, and to resolve every established plot thread. Without those earlier parts, I would have to invent details, which would contradict your requirement. Please provide one of the following, parts 1 to 8, the approved 9-part outline, or the previous conversation containing them. With that context, I'll produce part 9 exactly in the format you specified, approximately 550 words. English only. One continuous block with no line breaks. No title, headings, labels, meta text, or CTA. A complete ending that resolves the story consistently and ends with a strong final sentence.